Hi, my name is Deborah Thomas, and I'm the R. Jean Brownlee Professor of Anthropology and the Director of the Center for Experimental Ethnography at the University of Pennsylvania. I came to the Academy from a career as a performer, and though I did not initially apply to an anthropology department, I did see myself as following in the lineage of people like Zora Neale Hurston and Catherine Dunham. And these were Black women whom I understood to be kindred spirits, women who gleaned insights about the human condition by bringing together their roles as artists and cultural observers. And this was a union that also supported a kind of political action in which I was already interested and involved. I was someone who went to Brown in the 1980s, where no one blinked an eye when I said I wanted to write and stage an evening-length theater dance piece for my senior honors thesis in semiotics. Brown was also where George Bass and the Rights and Reasons Theater provided space for students and community members to learn from each other in the process of creating work together, and where choreographers explored the conundrums of ancient literature and popular culture alike for embodied and expressive ways of knowing. And these were modes of working that I continued to pursue in New York, in Bahia, Brazil, and that developed further when I was performing and doing community engagement with the urban bushwomen. Leaving urban bushwomen for graduate school was the moment I found out that for most people, knowledge production was not a collaborative, participatory, and embodied process. And as I learned more about anthropology, I found this increasingly strange, since we ourselves are the vehicles for understanding and knowing. Our bodies and our relationships form the grounds for the insights we glean and the archives of life that we cultivate. Of course, it's also true that anthropology, like all other disciplines forged in the wake of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, has historically been a colonial science, where anthropology has offered us a way to make legible and value peoples around the world whose practices and worldviews fall outside of European understandings of the human. It has done so in ways that presume a particular science of knowing, what Michel Rolfe-Trieux famously called the savage slot. By adhering to a conception of a liberal subject, one that is knowable and stable, reducible to ethnographic taxonomies, the discipline has historically failed to recognize other ways of knowing and being, and has tended to reproduce a subject-object relation between researchers and those being researched. So while the current moment is explicitly one of reckoning, it is also true that from the very beginnings of the discipline in the 18th and early 19th century, when evolutionary hierarchies of race were developed by anthropologically oriented physicians, and throughout anthropology's institutional elaboration in the 19th and 20th centuries, anthropologists, political activists, and cultural workers have responded to each and every denigrating screed. This was true not only in the United States, where Frederick Douglass responded to Samuel G. Martin and the other proponents of polygenism, but also further afield, such as when Haitian diplomat and anthropologist Antenor Firmin countered Arthur de Gobineau's essay on the inequality of the human races with his own text, The Equality of the Human Races. As more and more Black and Native scholars entered the discipline of anthropology, there has been a concerted effort to decolonize the field. And this has entailed a process of rethinking not only our theoretical frameworks, but also our methodologies, both while conducting research and while writing. Volumes such as Decolonizing Anthropology, Moving Further Toward an Anthropology for Liberation, which was published in 1990 by the Association of Black Anthropologists, and Linda Tuiwai Smith's book, Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous People, which was published in 1999. These books encouraged all anthropologists to interrogate the relationships of power and forms of representation that are embedded in our practice. These scholars were urging the discipline to think anew about who owns research and whose interests are served by it. These kinds of projects have continued. As just one example, we've been building from Ryan Jobson's Year in Review essay that we published while I was editor of American Anthropologist to organize a series of webinars hosted by the Wenner-Gren Foundation and co-organized by the Association of Black Anthropologists and Anthropology Southern Africa that has tackled issues related to ethics, intellectual extractivism, multimodal practice, and accountability. In many of our institutions, the current moment has also built on long-standing attempts to transform the canon, especially in relation to how we teach introductory courses at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. At Penn, we've also been working toward another kind of theoretical and methodological intervention through our Center for Experimental Ethnography, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my remarks. The Center for Experimental Ethnography was founded in 2018 to promote multimodal research practices as both method and theory, integral dimensions of scholarly research. We're a group of faculty across 8 of Penn's 12 schools who facilitate and support multimodal research practices among undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, and our partners within the city of Philadelphia and beyond. We coordinate research, public partnerships related to multimodal work practices. We consolidate those activities in which we and our students are already engaged. And we grow these generative connections by hosting visiting scholars, coordinating workshops and conferences, supporting multimodal project-based courses, facilitating visual, sonic, and performative undergraduate and graduate research projects, producing rigorous criteria for assessing these projects, including guides for tenure and promotion, engaging with arts and community-based institutions throughout Philadelphia, and forging connections with other like-minded institutions worldwide. We believe that multimodal research practices transform how we conduct research, how we generate and disseminate knowledge, how we train students, and how we remain accountable to the communities in which we interact and through which our research circulates. We see creative practice as intellectual work that necessarily historicizes the inequalities that pervade our society and that develop interventions through collaborative and participatory work. A basic premise that underlies our efforts is the contention that an expanded and multimodal definition of what counts as scholarship will help lead to a more diverse university community, and a community in which artistic practice is a cornerstone not only for engaged and participatory social justice work, but also for the reimagining and transformation of the university as a whole. So I want to leave you with just a couple examples of current projects and collaborations. Last spring, one of our visiting fellows was choreographer Reggie Wilson, with whom we had worked throughout 2018-19 on a project that was sponsored by Philadelphia Contemporary, the Dance Space Project, and Partners for Sacred Places. So as part of that project, which was titled Grounds That Shout and Others Merely Shaking, Reggie curated dance with 8 local choreographers and dance groups at 3 historic churches in Philadelphia. The Center and Camera, which is the Collective for Advancing Multimodal Research Arts, the graduate student body that is affiliated with the Center for Experimental Ethnography, we were brought into the project to document Reggie's process, and that has resulted in a film that we're now submitting to festivals. Because Reggie works through the rubric of what he calls kinesthetic anthropology, we stayed in touch after his Philadelphia residency ended, and I invited him to spend a semester with us as a fellow. The two of us team taught a course called Kinesthetic Anthropology to a group of 11 students from the School of Arts and Sciences, the Annenberg School for Communication, Stuart Weitzman School of Design, the Perelman School of Medicine, and the Graduate School of Education. And throughout the semester, we investigated contemporary performance in relation to Africanist forms and functions of dance, movement, and action. We were interested in training ourselves to recognize the cultural values, social purposes, and choreographic innovations embedded in bodily action and motion. And these explorations informed the final projects each of the students completed, which ran the gamut from collages, film, walking tours, creative autoethnography, and soundscapes. Next fall, we are bringing in visual artist Saya Woolfolk, who is part of an exhibit titled Rising Sun that's being co-organized by the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and the African American Museum of Philadelphia. In preparation for the exhibit and for Saya's residency, next semester, we're offering a course called Contemporary Artists in Conversation. And this course will give students skills in interviewing, oral history, and podcast production by hosting a series of conversations with the artists involved in the exhibit. Thematically, and following the exhibit plan, students will focus on how artists tackle the canonical history of the United States and how their practices speak to critical processes of reckoning and repair. And throughout the course, contemporary art will be positioned as a complementary method of scholarship to ethnography, which will give students hands-on experience in exploring how conversations between art and anthropology can open up avenues for collaborative, ethical, and engaged scholarship. And while Saya is with us, we anticipate that she will involve the students in the exhibit in some way. We've also hosted Louis Messiah, the founder and director of Scribe Video Center, Amy Cox, a dancer and anthropologist currently based at Yale, Ernst Carroll, a sound artist who focuses on the practice of location recording and composition, Emily Karras, a mixed media visual artist whose work concerns self-discovery and the healing of historical wounds, Wayne Modest, whose Center for Material Culture, housed within the trio of ethnographic museums in the Netherlands, foregrounds issues of redress and repair. Christina Knight, who's the director of the Visual Studies program at Haverford, who works experimentally with movement and visual culture. Stephen Feld, renowned acoustomologist, anthropologist, and filmmaker. Jenny Cho, also an anthropologist and filmmaker who's been interested in the different meanings of indigeneity in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Playwright and performer Ricardo Braccio, and affect theater practitioners Christiana Giordano and Greg Perotti. And next semester, we will host Amitav Ghosh, whose class will engage students in a staging of his new parable, Jungle Nama, which adapts an episode from a folktale to also address issues of urbanization, climate change, and environmental disaster. So for us at the CEE, these kinds of multimodal collaborative engagements are the Academy's inevitable future. And by supporting and generating these kinds of projects, we're contributing to a decolonizing process, both a method and a theory of transformation.